Good evening and welcome, dear friends, to this fourth session of the 2022 Turner Winter Series, now in its 17th year and now being held in the spacious comfort of the Robert H. Jackson Center here in Jamestown. I'm Maureen Raveno. Whether you are here in person, watching through live streaming, or if you are joining us later via YouTube, it is my great pleasure to begin our time together with a brief introduction of our timely and interesting guest, Dennis W. Elsenbeck, which will then initiate the conversation between Dennis and our perennial host and the founder of this series, Jamestown's and the Jackson Center's own Greg Peterson. So let me first say a few words to begin to get to know and appreciate our special guest. Dennis W. Elsenbeck, a member of the New York Energy Council and the New York State Climate Action Council, is one of the most recognized figures in New York's utility and clean energy industry, valued because of his extensive experience and reputation as a passionate advocate for clean energy solutions. Now president of Viridi Parente, a developer of innovative battery technology that can be safely installed and operated in nearly any environment or location, he is responsible for the strategic direction and alignment of products and services for Viridi's subsidiaries, Volta Energy and Green Machine, and represents Viridi in legislative and regulatory interests and energy policy. Before joining Viridi Parente, Dennis established and led the Phillips Lytle law firm Energy and Sustainability Group, which assisted clients with regulatory compliance and energy product solutions. For nearly 30 years, he was with National Grid, championing sustainability projects and aligning clean energy solutions with economic development opportunities. Throughout his career, he has worked to develop the voice of the consumer in energy policy as sustainability has become the focus for the future. We welcome Dennis to this evening's conversation. So now, let's all relax and enjoy the kind of informative and insightful conversation that is the hallmark of Greg's 17-year Turner Series interviews, this week with a focus on New York energy, now and in the future.
Dennis, so at the end of the college football year, there's a game, Army against Navy. Who do you root for?
You got to go with Navy. As an old squid, you got to stick with your guns and sailors all the way.
So tell me about, I look at you and I think energy, I think National Grid, I think of just an impact guy and now a statewide, but was that something natural for you to get into? Was this something your parents were into, this sort of engineering? Was that part of your world?
No, it's sort of something that's part of my DNA. I'm an industrial engineer by training. Industrial engineers put pieces and parts together. I always tell people that when you look up in into the stars, and you say, geez, look at all those stars, I immediately say, oh, there's the Big Dipper, there's this, there's that. Because I love putting things together. And we live in a world where everyone speaks on behalf of what they believe, but disconnected. Efficiency is gained when you put everything together.
So you were good at erector sets.
I was great at erector sets. It's interesting that we can still talk about erector sets.
Well, yeah, I look at our audience behind us and their age demographics. They get it.
Yeah.
They get it. Maybe not many people watching. You're here as a consultant. You're also here because you are a big dog in the wild world of New York State energy. And to kind of drill down a little bit, as I understand it, and there's a lot of stuff I don't understand, but the New York State Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act was enacted in 2019. Yes. And that act was to eliminate 100% of climate pollution caused by humans in New York State. A lofty goal.
Yes.
And they set targets of 85% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions by 2050 and an interim target of 40% reduction by 2030. And and other standards as well. In order to achieve those ambitious goals, the Act created a 22-member Climate Action Council, of which you are a member.
Yes, sir.
And you're really the only member, to the best of my knowledge, on this council who actually had, honest to God, energy experience before you.
Well, we have Gavin Donahue, who represents independent power producers, and Donna DeCarolis, who's the president of National Fuel. Probably the only one with actual electric system experience from the supply, delivery, and demand point of view, actually understanding what the consumers are looking for in energy policy.
So when they created this council and you get the call, what was your reaction?
I asked a very simple question because it was Senator Kaminsky, Senator Kennedy, and Senate Majority Leader Stuart Cousins, and they interviewed me, and I asked a very simple question: are you asking me to be involved because you think I have a political position in order to put forward, or is it because you think that I'll look at the system much more holistically and do the right thing? And to a person, the reason why we're asking you and we want to nominate you is because you understand the system, you understand we have to think about solving real problems, not just looking at the goals, and for that, we want to put your name forward. That's what made me convinced that I should be on that type of committee. It's so far a 2-year commitment I've been involved in it, and it's not something you can take lightly. You have to do research, you have to understand the presentations that are being made. There's a lot of consultant feedback, there's a lot of utility level discussions, there's a lot of activist, environmental level discussions as well. And you got to think about balancing all of those issues, and that's part of my DNA. I love balancing things.
So part of that balancing, of course, you, from a background perspective, University of Buffalo School of Engineering and Applied Sciences, University of Rochester MBA, SUNY Polytech, Industrial Engineering Technology. And did you launch directly into the electrical grid business?
No, when I first got out, I was in the service. I went to a community college when I got out, learned trade, air conditioning, actually, specifically. And I started at Carrier Corporation and United Technologies developing energy management systems. So really thinking about how energy is used in a building or a campus or just about any other area and location. So I did that for a number of years, and then went to work for Niagara Mohawk, which was the predecessor to National Grid at the time. And it was because they were looking for people who understood how energy was used, not just how energy is delivered or how energy is generated, but what does the consumer really look for in energy? That impressed me, and it convinced me that that's where I needed to go. And I did that for 30 years.
And you also did that because you knew in your heart of hearts that the predecessor to Niagara Mohawk was a company of which Robert Jackson represented here in Chautauqua County. So I knew you wanted to follow in the footsteps of Robert Jackson, because someday you would be at the Jackson Center.
When I did my full debriefing on the type of questions I was going to get when I interviewed to go with Niagara Mohawk, boy, I said, geez, that name is going to come up, and I need to have some background on it.
Thank God you're here today. This is fantastic. And so you ultimately, though, you end up with Niagara Mohawk, which then, of course, then became National Grid. What was your role there?
So I was a regional executive. I was in charge of the Western New York region, so anything from Niagara County right down to beautiful Chautauqua. So I covered the entire area representing the energy consumer side of the company, looking at the type of transmission, distribution planning, and tried to do it in such a way that responds to the needs of my constituent base. So it's a big coverage area, but, you know, really what you discover is each area is different. Each area knows what they want. All you have to do is ask them. And I learned that early on. And I think it made me a better utility representative, to be honest.
So you got the call from the guys at the County of Chautauqua Industrial Development Agency saying, hey, Dennis, we would like to do X amount and we need energy from Niagara Mohawks, subsequently National Grid. So were you the point guy where you'd get the economic development calls?
Yeah, and there's always interesting folks, especially in Chautauqua, so.
Name names, so that's important, yeah.
So I love Rich and Mark, because I really think that they have an idea of what they want. They have the full support of the legislature in terms of kind of like what their priorities are. They have great ideas. They know what they're trying to attract to this area. They know the assets, but they also know where they need help. So they can define the gaps. And I've always appreciated people who tell me that, yeah, I like what you're doing, but here's what you could be doing better, because that allows us all to do much better, and it improves the manner in which we can market New York, and it's people like that that really energize what I do.
When you talk about the definition of the gaps, this is the gaps of capacity, is this the gaps of delivery of the energy from the electric grid?
Yeah, it's interesting because when you do utility planning, which means, you know, these transmission lines, which are the larger lines that run across the state, or the local distribution lines, the first thing we ought to be doing is understanding what the economic development and the developers are looking for in terms of future planning, to integrate that into the utility planning so that we have commonality amongst upgrading the system if it's deteriorated at age, but then really thinking about investing for the future of the region, future of the county, future of Jamestown. You've got to think about it from the point of view of, you know, how do we actually bring power to the Jamestown BPU so that they're doing their job? So we can't leave out any of the potential opportunities that is seen by the market participant, not so much by, let's say, the regulator or the utility or the policymaker in general. We have to respond to what's needed by the people who understand the region best.
So you talked about the Jamestown Board of Public Utilities.
Yes.
A few people who are involved in that world are in the audience today. Do you care to, from your perspective, kind of comment on, this is sort of a Jamestown city-owned municipality, a municipal unit, and how's your sense of that?
I'm very much in favor of it because they're part of the community. You know, I was always proud to be part of a public utility serving different area, different municipalities. But I could never feel the same way as the Jamestown BPU does because they are part of the community. They're part of the fabric of their everyday energy use. They worry about the bills going out to the customer. They worry about whether or not an individual can pay simply because they're part of that community. I can say I represent that feeling and that rationale, but I can't say it to the degree that the Jamestown BPU does. I also think they have a lot more flexibility because a lot of the utility governance it falls under standardization, meaning that if you do one thing in one area, you got to do this very same thing all across your service area. Whereas when you're in Jamestown, you're worried about Jamestown, and you can be creative to the point that you can respond to the type of issues that crop up that you can't always plan for, and I envy that.
You are on the Climate Action Council, New York State Climate Action Council, which is designed to prepare a scoping plan to achieve the state's bold clean energy. You were given those sort of aspirational goals by the state. It was a state legislative act.
Yes.
Here it is.
Yep.
You guys go figure out how to make that a reality. When you accepted the position to be on that council, you knew that those were the aspirational goals.
Yes.
What was your kind of knee-jerk reaction saying, Really? You expect all that to happen by 2050?
I like aspirational goals, but the problem with aspirational goals, they become kind of like the motivation and almost like a race to achieve. And so basically we put these goals in place, and predominantly, if you look at it, a lot of them are more supply side oriented. Renewable energy mix by 70% by 2030, 100% renewable energy by 2040. So programs and incentives are developed to focus on those, and so we race to achieve those goals. The reality is, on the supply side, if you do total electric generation, meaning take everything off fossil fuel, you'll contribute up to 16% towards New York's greenhouse gases. My question is always, and when I first started, is shouldn't we be focused on the 84%? That seems to be more exciting. And the 84% tends to be on then the demand side of the electric system. So you hear it all the time about electric vehicles, heat pumps, electric appliances, et cetera, and et cetera. Well, that's going to have a dramatic impact on the way the system is balanced. So when I get asked to do stuff like this, I'm immediately thinking about, are we asking the right questions? Are we focused on the right goals? Because anytime we set a goal that has money associated with it, we seem to attract a lot of people from out of New York State that seem to like to take advantage of our subsidies that are paid for by the ratepayers and the taxpayers of New York. What's their voice in the process? And I try and bring that kind of sensitivity to this type of an appointment, to be honest. And it's sometimes not comfortable because it's not natural.
Some may, when you're setting policy to sort of try to implement something that's, again, aspirational, often there's a lot of incentives out there, there's a lot of dollars out there, driving some sense of immediacy. Yeah. And I got to believe as you're creating policy that sometimes you look at the dollars that are create immediate reaction, that is probably not good for the overall aspirational goal.
Yeah, because it almost like it forces you to chase money, to look at the type of programs that are available and not look at, so what are we solving for? What's our issues? What's our challenges? And are we focused on our challenges in order to make sure that New York is in a better position economically? So looking at the aspiration of high-level goals almost like takes you off into it must be about energy. It can't just be about energy. It can't just be about saving the planet. You always have to think about it in the context of what is the problem? What are we solving for? What's the opportunity and how do we capture it? So energy for me is more about economic development than it is about achieving an energy-related goal. If I can focus on economic development, I can create the type of green products or green services that, yes, contribute to New York's goals, but it sets up New York to be a player in the global climate market, which is $1 trillion market.
So we talk about New York and the policy, but in order to create capacity, in order to kind of create the product, much of that product is imported into New York State. There doesn't seem to be a policy which encourages economic development to create those products.
And I agree, Greg, and it takes allowing us to take a step back. It takes this period of time. So as you point out, the scoping document is now in draft form. It is out for public comment. This is an opportunity for the market to look at it and say, do I see myself in that scoping document? Do I see an opportunity in that document? If we haven't learned from COVID in terms of supply chain management, we haven't learned anything. We can actually develop those type of products, those type of services that we don't have to pay other states, other countries to come in and solve New York's problems or New York's challenges or New York's opportunities. We can actually capture those opportunities, be self-sufficient, create green energy supply chain and manufacturing, and it's a much more sustainable viewpoint by balancing economic and environmental sustainability. They can coexist. It's not a left issue, it's not a right issue, it's the way to do good business that achieves environmental sustainability.
So you drop out of the blue COVID-19 crisis response. And you happen to have written an article, September 1st, 2020, that was reported in Power, a News and Technology for Global Energy Industry, how COVID-19 crisis response informs next steps for climate mitigation. I must tell you, having read this, I read your stuff, Dennis.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I go, wow, this is a segue. How do we work at that? And wonder for the audience here, how did you not to come up with a topic, but how does it actually work that way?
Well, it's interesting because energy, unlike other, let's say, products that are out there, it doesn't seem to follow good. And again, I'm an engineer with an MBA, so I always think I'm a frightening person because not only can I fix it, but can I justify how I fixed it. But what we found is that we don't balance supply, demand, and delivery. And when COVID hit, we actually got very focused on the demand. We said, wow, there's where the issues are. There's where we're having the number of cases that are being reported. We understood demand. But then we said, but we're having a problem getting PPE where we can't access it. Where is it being shipped from? Oh, it's being shipped from China or other countries. Then we said, oh, but the delivery system is broken because we're prohibitive of sending off transport in order to pick that up. That's the energy system. It's disconnected. You always balance supply, demand, and delivery, and you do so by capturing supply chain opportunities and bring them together so that you can manage the risks that are out there, so that when we're producing the products, we're relying on our neighbors, we're relying on our fellow counties, our neighbors, et cetera, in order to make sure that we're achieving these type of goals, but doing it economically.
You mentioned county.
Yes.
And we're in Chautauqua County, and I know our legislative chairman, Pierre Chagnon, is incentivized a bunch of a committee to see if there is a Chautauqua County energy policy. And I understand that you're part of that. So what's your sense of Pierre's charge and kind of the process?
Well, what I like about Pierre's charge is that he wants results. And being a highly unpaid volunteer, but motivated by that kind of passion towards coming up with a plan, that touches me in the right way. And it's a great diverse group of individuals looking at it from every aspect possible. So we're going to be putting together ideas, concepts that will be presented to Pierre, who will then present to the legislature, so that Chautauqua will put a stake in the ground. This is what we feel is needed in Chautauqua, not only to benefit Chautauquans, but to also demonstrate how New York can lead the discussion. We need counties developing plans. And it can't be about, let's wait for what's the next NYSERDA program or federal program, because it takes you away from what you feel is important to your county. If we can start with establishing what the county needs and what the county sees as opportunity, the argument then becomes, what is the Climate Act? What are the programs doing for Chautauqua to enhance Chautauqua's ability to achieve the goals that they set for themselves that allows Chautauqua to contribute to New York's goals?
You wrote in that article dealing with COVID-19, in New York State, our climate goals are supported by programs and incentives that tend to focus on singular elements of the market, such as increasing supply of renewable energy or reducing demand through energy efficiency programs. This singular approach to incentives, without fully considering other market issues, presents the possibility of developing system imbalance. Is anybody on your council listening to this?
I sure hope so, Greg. And it's not for lack of ensuring that that very same message is said at almost every one of the sessions that I put together. We've got to really balance the system, because anytime you have a system out of balance, it just costs money. There's no value that's being built from that. Policy tends to pick a subject, and then we put a date stamp on it, as I mentioned. So right now, it's about building renewable energy, so the 70% by 2030 strikes me. The problem with thinking that way is that we build these renewable energy more based on land availability than, let's say, thinking about where the transmission system is, where's the distribution system. So what happens is we build these solar farms or wind farms, and then we discover that, geez, sometimes the sun doesn't come out, sometimes the wind doesn't blow. So we have to think about maybe long duration battery storage to impact the intermittency issue. When we discover that these systems are located nowhere near our load centers, now we go to the utilities and say you have to rebuild your transmission line to connect them. That's not the way to balance a system. The way to look at it is from a demand point of view first and foremost. There's not many people that develop manufacturing plants without understanding what the demand is, at least not a lot of manufacturing plants that are still in business. So we got to think about the demand. A lot of what I do now with the company I currently work with is Viridi Parente. We build point-of-use battery storage systems, because as we think about adding more and more electrification, because that's a primary objective of the Climate Act, and that means that we're going to add heat pumps, electric vehicles, electric appliances, and et cetera, the electric demand will increase at a rather rapid pace. The speculation is 65 to 80%. So immediately you think, well, Jesus, the delivery system in place in order to meet that type of a demand, to the COVID example. And quite frankly, it's not capable of being able to deliver a 65 to 80% increase in capacity. But if I think about a systematic approach, if I add a heat pump, what if I add a point-of-use battery storage system? I sign the customer up to a time-of-use rate that the utilities offer, and now I have the ability of looking at the consumer as my primary objective. I provide resiliency at their location. I provide energy price management at their location. And I allow them to contribute to New York's goals.
In that same article dealing with COVID, you reference the fact that manufacturers tend to bear significant costs for energy programs and initiatives because funding is gathered through rate subsidies and surcharges. New York State should consider a policy to provide manufacturers with a more direct return on this investment, which an MBA would appreciate. The state could require some percentage, such as 50 to 75% of a renewable energy solution, to be manufactured or assembled in New York State, or at least in the U.S., to qualify for incentives. And you used as an example of the 10 top solar panel manufacturers and the top 10 wind turbine suppliers. Only one is U.S.-based.
Yeah, and this is kind of like thinking about the economic impact of achieving a goal, but thinking about it not so much from the of achieving a goal from an energy point of view, but achieving a goal by building an economy. If we start to think about what goes into a solar panel, or what goes into a wind farm, or what goes into the building of a heat pump, why don't we actually attract or work with our economic development agencies to say, New York is leading the nation in these very aggressive climate goals. If you would like to participate, please move here. And then basically think about it from the point of view of, build in New York, buy in New York, and then export worldwide. And it's a different perspective that I think is much more sustainable, because if all it is about achieving the goal, we'll continue to increase these subsidies in order to achieve that. The reason why manufacturing pay a higher level of these type of subsidies is because subsidies tend to be aligned with commodity, the amount of energy you use. The more energy you use, which manufacturers go from either one shift or 3 shifts, the more energy they consume, the more they actually contribute in subsidized programs.
You are part of the council, and you spent over about 2 years
Yes.
creating this scoping plan. What was the process? Somebody put up a whiteboard one day and simply say, boom, let's just figure out what are the elements of a scoping plan.
Well, there's meetings every month with the 22-member council. The 22-member council heard from subject matter expertise, brought in consultants that looked at the different ways in order to integrate actual programs to achieve the goals, try to anticipate the type of benefits that would come out of that in terms of clean air or jobs that would be created. Part of the discussion needs to be looking at those jobs are created more from a sustainability point of view. If you look at the multiplier effect of a manufacturing job, let's say versus a professional or a service job, you create twice as many indirect jobs with manufacturing than you do with construction or service, et cetera. We're going to need construction anyway. I just think we need to be more purposeful on how to create more manufacturing opportunities. So we would meet monthly and have these type of discussions. We'd hear from the experts. NYSERDA staff did a lot of the collecting of the information, assembling it in such a way that it's easily understood by the different members of the Climate Action Council. And we all looked at it from our own perspectives, but we hoped in order to achieve a final scoping document that each of our individual viewpoints consolidated into one focused direction. That scoping document was draft form and put out for public comment as of January 1st of this year. Public comment period is open for 120 days. This is an opportunity for people, markets, developers, manufacturers, day-to-day community people to look at the scoping document and look at it. And I know it's voluminous. Most political documents are, I think. But look at it and make sure you see yourself in it. And if you don't see yourself in it, make sure that that's known. Make sure that that you take ownership in terms of how to make the scoping document better. Because right now that scoping document is focused on the goals. I want it to be focused on our communities first and foremost.
Hence, your encouragement, and many of your articles you've written about counties' involvement,
Yes.
municipals' involvement. Has that resonated? I know that's one of your key tenets in your speaking and your various articles. Is it possible for the counties to even react to this in such so it's effective?
Yeah, it's critical that they do. And I do believe their voices are strong if they're done in such a manner that it represents what they would like to see in their specific county. And if they can do it in such a way that demonstrates that what they're requesting fits their strategic planning process and achieving the climate goals actually could go through the county planning process so that they take ownership and they want to say, look, we're all for the goals, but we've got to do it in a manner that solves real opportunities or challenges within the community. And that way it's much more sustainable. The counties have an opportunity to maximize their voice potential in this. And to do that, good planning goes a long way. Getting your economic development agencies involved in it so it's one collective thought. We can buy into this, we can make sure that this happens, but it has to align with the objectives of the county, or I don't think it's sustainable. I think it's good. I think it positions us maybe to chase after one of the funding channels that could be out there, but what if that channel goes away? What did that have to do with the county plan? The county plan should drive how we achieve, how that final scoping document is written.
You received input from 7 advisory panels: transportation, agriculture and forestry, land use and local government, power generation, energy efficiency and housing, energy intensive and trade exposed industries, and waste, along with climate justice working group and just transition working group. Curious about the last two. How would you define those two groups as to, did that, just that by its title, did that engender a little politicization, if that's the term, into this process?
If you look at one of the tenets of the Climate Act was up to 40% of the spend was to benefit disadvantaged communities. Mm-hmm. So part of what the climate justice and environmental justice was to really start to define what is a disadvantaged community. One of the things that I didn't get a good feel for throughout the process, and it may be there, I just haven't captured it yet in my mind, is what is the definition of benefit? I get that, we would like to see 40% of the spend, but that's a spending approach. That is not what I would consider an investment that has a return associated with it. So the metrics have to be about, in my disadvantaged community, I would like to see the infrastructure improved. Because if you look at most Rust Belt neighborhoods, there's a lack of infrastructure or a lack of capacity. So I don't know how you revitalize these type of communities unless you fix the infrastructure issue first and foremost. Is that a benefit? Jobs. If we start to focus on bringing in green product manufacturers and we give an incentive so that they're located as part of the revitalization of our disadvantaged communities as defined by these groups, that's a benefit, because then we, instead of thinking about all of our wraparound services of individuals in our cities or in our communities finding work in green space, why don't we bring some of those jobs to those communities so that we have a much more equitable approach to solving the challenges of what's happened over the years in our cities, especially the Rust Belt cities, who have declined over a period of time. We can reverse that, but we have got to do it in such a way that creates value, the definition of benefits as seen by that community, not as seen by a policymaker, for lack of a better framework.
Part of the scoping plan, and trust me, I only read snippets, is a multi-year vision for a decarbonized New York and several strategies that could be adopted to make that a reality. What are some of them?
So a decarbonized economy, and you're seeing a lot of that, the 100% electric vehicle sales in New York by 2035. You're seeing a lot of the utilities in NYSERDA come up with programs for sponsoring electric vehicle charging stations. So decarbonization is moving from fossil to an electric option. So along with electric vehicles, there are heat pumps. So taking out your gas boiler, your furnace in your home, and going from natural gas or oil or propane to an electric option, predominantly a heat pump, whether it's an air source or a water source heat pump, electric appliances, electric hot water heaters, and so on. As I mentioned, as we look at doing that, and I think I had mentioned that the electric generation side or the supply side of the electric system contributes about 16% to greenhouse gas. The demand side contributes 84%. So this whole movement of decarbonization, buildings represent about 36% of greenhouse gases, transportation 32%, and then the rest is in waste, refrigerants, and agriculture. So moving towards a decarbonized economy assumes that the distribution network that's currently in place can withstand that kind of electric demand increase, and that's a bad assumption to make. So part of what we need to get out into this scoping document as feedback from the communities, the marketplace, is let's fix our distribution system so that it can accommodate that type of decarbonization. Because you will not achieve those goals with the existing distribution network. It is virtually impossible, simply because they're at a point where they're at or near capacity, especially in our inner cities or municipalities. And so we can't just assume we have an endless capacity in those lines.
Part of what is in the scoping document are such funding mentions as a carbon tax fee, cap and invest program, clean energy supply standards, and I think, reading just a commentary here, in evaluating the viability of these proposals, the council will face the challenge of funding decarbonization across all sectors while avoiding regressive impacts on consumers, leakage, diverting GHG emissions outside the state, and the creation of hotspots in disadvantaged communities. Is that a real concern?
Yeah, and I'm sure it's hard to decipher all of that, but let me just, when we talk about carbon pricing or taxes, it's really just it kind of almost turns into a penalty that if you hang on to, let's say, a fossil, so it's kind of like a penalty. I think we need to be more about incentives. I look at this growing electric demand that's out there, and so I know that we're going to have to upgrade a distribution system, which is a feeder that feeds your home or your business. I know that's going to have to occur because we just simply don't have the capacity in those lines. So can't the incentive be something like a developer response and say that I'm going to put a microgrid, and that microgrid will have attached to it some alternative energy source that is at the point of the need. I'll put a battery storage system on there to control the demand, and then I will set the electric pricing for whatever I serve on that particular site. That's an incentive-based. I'm really not comfortable with penalties. New York City has a very aggressive law. It's called Local Law 97. And what happens is that the city imposes a baseline for their carbon footprint. If the consumption of a given building is above that baseline, there's a penalty in terms of dollar per square foot that is above that baseline. The money that is collected in the penalties, from the way I understood it, goes to a general fund of the city. It doesn't actually go to then, okay, let's put that towards an energy solution or a climate solution. So I question whether or not that's looking at it from the point of view of advancing environmental sustainability more so to balance budgets. And so we kind of got to watch that, in my opinion, because that's what creates animosity or doubt that these type of programs actually are being built for what they're designed to do.
I'm reading something here concerning the council. Environmental groups have opposed using green hydrogen. There's green hydrogen, gray hydrogen, blue hydrogen. Explain what that is and what's the concern?
So, green hydrogen is hydrogen that is produced either through a hydropower-like allocation or directly off of solar. And what that is energy produced from hydro or solar that goes into what's referred to as an electrolyzer. The electrolyzer creates hydrogen. Because it was created by a renewable energy source like hydro or solar, that is considered green hydrogen. Blue hydrogen is created through a natural gas input source, so that's frowned upon as part of the climate process. I think there's concern about hydrogen because some studies say that there's more energy goes into the creation regardless of the color of hydrogen. I happen to be a fan of hydrogen. I think hydrogen, if we do enough research on it, has an opportunity to create a leadership position for New York in advancing this type of technology. I also believe that this type of fuel source can be put in some variation or some percentage in existing natural gas lines so that you're enhancing the delivery system from an economic point of view, using the natural gas system more on a fuel mix perspective. But there's so much upside potential that it has to be researched. And anything that has to be researched can attract a lot of research dollars from the federal government and others. So our colleges and universities, which I feel are second to none in the world, can take advantage of this, also become part of the climate change aspect, so that we're not bringing in outside consultants, but let's start using the assets we have here. So regardless of the color of hydrogen, I do believe there is a future for green, and that is hydrogen produced by a renewable energy source.
You're a very impressive guy, Dennis, you know that? This is such an education for me and for those listening and watching this here today. We could cover an awful lot, but as you're driving down from Buffalo today, knowing that you're going to be here at the Robert Jackson Center, what is a question or two that you hoped I would mention that I feebly have not yet?
Well, I always like the questions about, do I feel that New Yorkers are engaged enough? Do I feel that the average individual, the average manufacturer understands what this nation-leading climate act is attempting to do? And that's the kind of question that, unfortunately, I lose a lot of sleep over, because I don't like the answer I come up with. I just think it's something that we talk about. I think that it's, when we went through the last, let's say, 3 years on the political side of the Green New Deal, and whether or not I'm in favor of saving the planet or saving business, almost like they're decisions that can be made without balancing one over the other. And I just think we have got to come to the conclusion that we need to bring the left position and the right position into the middle, because we can really create an economic opportunity if we work towards developing those products or services that contribute to the global climate market. Because we can be a world leader in the development of green innovation in New York and become an exporter. But we have got to purposely do that, and we have got to have individuals that are educated on this topic enough so that when they look at their production line, when they look at their business model, they can see a repurposed potential in it to contribute to a product or a service that helps us achieve not only New York's goals, but let's position New York as a leader in exporting and meeting the global challenge. Short of that, I just don't think it's sustainable, simply because we can't continue to go to our manufacturer and ask them to continue to subsidize when they don't see a return.
Part of the study, just a quick bullet point, is a reference to the fact that the cost of inaction exceeds the cost of implementing the various options set forth in the draft plan by at least $90 billion when factoring in public health impacts and economic costs associated with climate change. Is there a concern, talk about feelings, I didn't know that that was gonna be the heavy, I'd have a couch instead of a chair. We could just talk through this. But is that a feeling that you have, that because of the number of disparate groups looking at a scoping plan, that it could grind the process to the point of inaction?
Yeah, and I think when we talk, about forecasting the benefits, and we talk in context of, well, if we don't do anything, it'll cost us more because we'll continue to have impacts against health, which is a medical issue, impacts against the environment, which will cause us to have to do more reclamation, cleaning, et cetera. The harsh reality is that, from my experience with 30 years of the utility, when I talk to an energy consumer, they look at costs month over month and year over year. So we have to do a better job not talking about the holistic, aspirational, avoided costs, because I'm not sure most bill payers say, geez, my bill went up 30%. Man, I'm glad it didn't go up 50%. It's just not the way I think bill payers or consumers think. So we've got to do a much better job in educating the individuals that are out there, and even our policymakers. Just continuing to talk about what we're avoiding is not what they're asking.
Yeah.
They're asking, what will be my bill impact?
Well, you talk about that and having a sense of immediacy. I think it wasn't that long ago before the headlines of the Buffalo News was ratepayers to pay less next year for natural gas. And your heating bill will be less. So now you're asking people to think beyond that, saying if we don't think strategically, it's gonna have an unbelievable impact on you, the ratepayer, 5, 10 years from now.
Yeah. Yeah, and think about the way you just said that, Greg. The cost reality is if you look at a BTU of heat from natural gas versus a BTU of heat from an electric option, regardless of the efficiency of the heat pump, the difference between those two costs are pretty dramatic. And so the individuals will look at it from the point of view of my heating is going to go up under an electric option. And so we have got to start to anticipate that. We got to start thinking about, system solutions. It's not put a heat pump in a house. It's not put an electric vehicle in a house. It's put a heat pump, an electric vehicle, a solar panel, a battery storage right at that use point, and then think about new regulatory utility models that price so that individuals benefit from decarbonization, not pay more. Because I think if you want to reverse a good law with aspirational goals, keep impacting your manufacturing community in this type of manner. And my fear is they will have no choice but to push back or to look at alternative locations to bring their business. And I just think we need to avoid that, and we do that by thinking ahead.
Speaking of thinking ahead, you have a goal of having the 120 days scoping opportunity here going on, public comment, and with an eye towards really throwing something on the governor's desk, get through the legislature, on the governor's desk by 2023.
Yes.
Real?
Yeah, so far we've held to the schedule that was put forth within the 2019 law. So by the end of 2022, there will be a final document, a final scoping document put in place that will become effective January 1st, 2023.
As a policy, does it have any bite to it? I mean, you're basically taking a statute that gave you authority as a council to create a plan, which will be implemented. Will the plan have things that are carrot and stick type things attached to it, or will it just be sort of policy?
So I believe there'll be carrot and stick. I think that there'll be a lot of programs and a lot of incentives that will be generated from that scoping document, all aimed at achieving the goals. The critical piece of that has to be, do you feel that the input that is provided by the public is done so in a manner that actually helps the community and not simply thinks about the community as a cost center to achieve a goal? Communities should be seen as investors, and that means that every investor expects some form of return. That way they develop much more commitment, much more ownership, and a deeper drive to accomplish the goal. And it can be done if we do so early and often, but without public comment. If we just sit back and say, well, whatever comes out of it, I'll try and take advantage of it, I will think we have missed the biggest opportunity of our generation. And that's not just from a climate point of view, it's from an infrastructure point of view as well. Between climate and infrastructure, the amount of dollars that'll be invested, I think, is going to be of biblical proportions. And if we don't start thinking about how that dollar should be spent to enhance economic opportunity so that we're all taking part in achieving these type of goals, that opportunity will pass us by. We'll be turned into suppliers of funding so that we enhance the manufacturing capability of everybody but New York.
How do you feel about it, Dennis?
I feel about that way.
Wow, this is fantastic, and as I'm thumbing through papers, I hearken back to an article you, again, wrote, Leveraging the Voice of County Leadership, and you conclude by saying the act is a call to arms for county leaders to step forward and develop strategies that will help address current energy-related obstacles while directly contributing to the act objectives. And I think that's your call of arms.
Yes, it is.
And you have called that tonight, and I thank you very much, Dennis, for spending some time. I appreciate it.
Always love to be invited to Jamestown, always love to be in Chautauqua County, so I am not a stranger, so look forward to the next visit.
With that, we call it a day, and thank you, Dennis.
Thank you, Greg, appreciate it.
That's great. Thank you.
Oh, my pleasure.